All right, thanks, Doug. I'm just gonna pull up my PowerPoint, and Mark, I still have quite a few of your personal items in your desk. We won't list them here, but they're ready for you when you come back. So I'm gonna give a season summary of this winter. I think most people are from here and probably followed along at least a little bit, so it'll be a little bit of a refresher, and hopefully I have a little bit of time to discuss some of the strategies we took for forecasting with this really unique snowpack. And this is a photo of an avalanche that we saw last week up in Highlight. It probably occurred a few days before we saw it. I think it's the most recent avalanche we had failing on the deep, weak layers near the bottom of the snowpack. And we'll come back to that, but first I know everyone's here really for a summary of our snowmobile stucks this winter. This is one of the more stuck places I came across Ian being in, and it was only because Shannon and I were stuck back on the trail that we couldn't help him get out, otherwise he wouldn't have been in that bad of a situation. This is where I got a little bit pinned between some trees trying to make a tight turnaround and was a little too confident that I'd be able to squeeze through those. Luckily, the dirt was only a few feet deep and we were able to just reverse right out of there. And there's Doug. This actually wasn't this season. It's just one of my favorite photos of Doug when he was teaching me how to snowmobile in my first couple years and wrapped the ski around that tree there. So I wanted to put it in here as everyone knows he's retiring in about a week and 10 days maybe, if he's lucky. So a little tribute to Doug and a segue to this season, because in late January, Doug said this famous quote that in his last 29 years of avalanche forecasting, this year is unique in my 29 years of avalanche forecasting in southwest Montana. Large avalanches are being triggered from hundreds of feet away long after the most recent snowfall. Even a few inches of new snow is causing us to elevate the danger. This is not like other seasons, and it's making our entire forecast team nervous. We are recalibrating our risk and notching back our travel plans due to a great deal of uncertainty about what it will take for things to become more stable.
Pretty brilliant, actually.
It was. We'll see how that played out. But yeah, he pretty much nailed it. I mean, I was saying the same thing, but I've only had 9 years of experience, so it really didn't quite hold up. So here's some data to back up that anecdote, and this is just the last 6 seasons of danger throughout our forecast area. The most recent season on your right there. And so it's not Doug's whole career, but I think these previous 4 are a little more representative of an average year where we have a lot of moderate danger. That pretty much dominates. A little bit of low, a little bit of high. Considerable often comes in second. 2 years ago, it's notable we had a lot of low danger. That was kind of unique on the other side of the spectrum. And the danger is like, that's what we're making up. I mean, Doug told us it's bad, so we're like, all right, it's going to be considerable all year. And Dave's like, well, why? Why is it so bad? And what came to mind first to me was we had tons of remotely triggered avalanches for months. They were being triggered from hundreds of feet away, opposite aspects, and just nothing like I'd seen in my 9 years, and Doug and Carl didn't seem to recall anything like it either. So just the last 6 seasons of avalanche data here, I just pulled those up because that's when we've had our data organized enough to be able to summarize it. But on the left there is the total number of avalanches we recorded each season. The first 4 there are pretty similar. Last year we had a ton of snowfall from October through April, so we recorded a lot of avalanches. And then this year we recorded a ton of avalanches because it was such a bad snowpack. And what's really key there is that we recorded 72 remotely triggered avalanches compared to about a dozen the past 5 years. And that was, we just never seen anything like it. That's what made it really unique. It is a little bit of a sidebar is that the year that we had the most low danger, we had 4 fatalities still. So that just is a note on how unpredictable really the human behavior or the accidents can be. And we just kind of got to stay diligent no matter what the snowpack or danger is. So I'll summarize a little bit more some of this season's data. We'll come back to this graph as I kind of rapid fire through some of the avalanche activity we saw this year. But I like to look at our snow water equivalent through the season to kind of get a snapshot of what the snowpack was. And you're all avalanche professionals, so your first look at that probably gives you a little bit of an idea of what we dealt with, as well as you were here, so you probably know. But seasons where I see kind of this flat line into an increase is pretty indicative of what we had this year of bad persistent weak layers just producing big later. And so the general pattern is a little bit of snow in November, really dry, till December, a little bit of snow, really dry, till the beginning of January. And then we had some steady storms to start kind of each month of January, February, and March. And so Island Park is that top line there, and then Cook City is the black line. Southern Madison and West Yellowstone are next. That's kind of our southern regions. The Bridgers are the red line, highlights the green line, and Big Sky's the blue line. So there's a little bit of a difference between like north and south, and then Island Park likes to do its own thing and just double the storm totals all the time. But we generally have the same pattern and generally the same story. The timing of big events might have varied by a few days in each location. I made this little animation of how danger progressed through the season, and it starts here when we started forecasting on the 7th with considerable. As things mellowed out, kind of had some moderate into the end of December and our brief period of low danger at the beginning of February before we started getting snow, and it immediately bumped to considerable with some high in there. And even as snowfall tapered off and flatlined towards the end of January, we held it at considerable, and then again in February, immediately up to high in a lot of places and considerable. We're getting into late February there, and especially those southern areas really hold on to the high danger and considerable through the beginning of March. And with some warmer temperatures and less snowfall, we started to see a little bit less big avalanches, more storm slabs, wind slabs, some wet snow. And this was actually a couple days ago, but it's kind of the same story today. To summarize that, that's not the actual data graph. I basically just painted that on there digitally, but just a little abstract of how the danger progressed through the season side by side with our snowfall. And that long period of orange and red through the center there shows what we were working with. So a month before we started forecasting in November, we had a little bit of snow on that early season snowpack, and we immediately started seeing avalanches. This is in the Great One. A skier triggered a wind slab. Nothing huge, but in that kind of terrain, definitely could be dangerous. Some natural avalanches happened in Cook City, looking like they broke on that weak foundation, and a skier triggered an avalanche on the east face of Mount Blackmore. Jump forward to when we started forecasts, about a month later, when we got our next round of snowfall at the beginning of December, and it just took an inch and a half of snow water equivalent before we saw some naturals down in Cook City. On the right there was a remotely triggered avalanche by snowmobilers. They were out in the flat terrain. And then another avalanche on the east face of Mount Blackmore. Different avalanche, but I think it was the same skier in the same terrain. This one was triggered by a goat, I believe. Chelan had a really nice write-up on that one up at Big Sky, enclosed terrain. You can see the crowns up top there that showing propagation and kind of that persistent weak layer character. We had snowfall taper off. We only had one little storm around the holidays that bumped us up to considerable for a bit. And during that time, avalanche activity declined, but there was constant collapsing, lumping of the snowpack, widespread, getting reported and experienced by us. So it took us a while to drop it to low, but we got there at the beginning of January, right before we started getting snow again. So beginning of January, our snowpack had evolved to be
The whole
just
snowpack's
a pile
of
facets.
sugary facets. And throughout our forecast area, we've got weak, sugary snow pretty much on every slope has weakened out this entire snowpack.
The weak foundation that makes up the snowpack.
Is just sugary, weak, faceted snow. from top to bottom on pretty much every slope that has snow. And it's just a pile of sugary facets like we've seen
Much across the whole advisory area. There's really weak snow at the ground and even weaker snow at this interface.
Just have facets the whole way. So it's weak.
It buried a layer of surface hoar. Nice, well-preserved layer of surface hoar on top. Down in a couple pits is this really clear gray stripe of surface hoar that was buried and well-preserved. Doesn't really matter, the snowpack's really weak everywhere. Still is this really weak, sugary junk down at the bottom.
We have plenty of. There's a weak layer everywhere. It's all, the entire snowpack is made up of sugary faceted snow.
Snowpack is just all faceted. I mean, it's just weak. And what we really need to be careful for is any spots that have a slab of snow.
ECT on really weak facets. We triggered collapses down low.
We're sitting on top of weak, sugary facets that formed from the snow that fell in October and November.
Top of this faceted weak junk. So any place where we've got a wind load on top of these facets, and that's where you want to be most careful.
And there it is, Doug's forecast for the rest of the season. So that was just, I made that video on like January 9th or 5th or something, and that was a month or so of field obs, clearly explaining what we were going to be seeing for the rest of the year. And around January 6th, the mountains got just a couple inches of snow. It was like 1 to 2 tenths of an inch of snow water equivalent. A little bit of wind, and we were getting little wind slabs. During that time, with that really weak faceted snowpack, we were getting these facet sloughs where you get it moving and it would just gouge out, take out the whole season's snowpack with it. And I've really only seen those on videos coming out of Colorado. And one season at Bridger Bowl, when was the season that we had the really big wet slabs there. I was seeing this kind of stuff early season. So that small amount of snow, just a couple inches and a little bit of wind, formed touchy wind slabs. We were able to test with our new stability test called the backpack slap test. It's really beneficial when you're snowmobiling because a lot of us ski and we have our skis to kind of kick cornices or test wind slabs with that big surface area. But when you're snowmobiling, your boots punch through a lot and you don't affect it as well. So the backpack slap was pretty effective. This is later in the season. This is more recent when we had a more stubborn cornice. We had to revert to a little more traditional patrol techniques. But something to keep in mind if you find yourself on a snowmobile. And obviously consider scene safety. It's easy to also don't swing too heavy of a pack because it's not the most ergonomic and you can easily throw out a shoulder or your back or something. And consider what's in your pack, things that might get smashed like a sandwich or carbonated beverages that might explode. So also that day, even though these slabs were only 4 to 6 inches deep, they were remote triggering. This is where I stepped. This one triggered from a little ways back on the flat ridge line. Another one triggered as we were riding along on almost scoured ridge line. And then Doug and Zach were down at Lionhead a couple days later. We'd had a few more inches of snow. They were remote triggering soft slabs and cornices. And Doug's got that look on his face like he did when the snowmobiles wrapped around the tree. And like, what are we going to do about this? So they had ECTPVs, and not like there was a crust there that you're pulling down with the cord. It was just a soft slab sitting on surface hoar. And then facets below that. This avalanche, Ian and I remotely triggered from approaching. We were on the flat ridge above. You can see that surface hoar layer in the crown there. And that day, as we were riding around in the meadows of Taylor Fork, everywhere we'd dig a hand pit down, could find that thick layer, about 3 centimeters thick of surface hoar. And we were getting these cracks shooting out from our skis, and like we've never seen before when you're snowmobiling, just cracks shooting out like tens of feet. And we had a few videos from other people showing similar stuff this season. That's that same layer of big feathers. That's down on the right is down at Lionhead later in January. We've got 2 really well-preserved layers of surface hoar with facets around them. The remote triggered avalanches kept going. It's only mid-January still, but then they kept getting bigger. Ian and Zach triggered this one on the left down in Cook City. The one on the right was up at Flanders, triggered from low on the slope by skiers. They were down in the flats when they triggered that one. Dave triggered this avalanche at Buck Ridge from like 250 feet away. It was way down in the flats. Around that same time, we had our first avalanche on Saddle Peak, which ended up being kind of the, well, I wouldn't say the only, but one of the biggest ones we had so far on Saddle this year. There were some other close calls with wind slabs, but nothing yet. And so that was about the time that Doug came up with this amazing, brilliant quote. And we're just getting started. And that's going into the beginning of February there, as we started getting our February storm cycles. This is what the snowpack looked like in Cook City at February 5th. This is more like Colorado snowpack, I guess, like, or maybe in the Bridgers. February in Cook City should have 10 times as much snow, not nearly as much weak depth hoar. And so that was just the perfect setup to start receiving snow on. A few weeks after Dave had been at Buck Ridge, he went back for his unfinished business. Remote triggered the rest of that slope. It was a little bit deeper, bigger this time. Still triggered it from about 200 feet away down in the flats. And around that same time, we started to see really big avalanches in Cook City. This was triggered by a snowmobiler on the north side of Scotch Bonnet. Dave investigated that one, found surface hoar buried near the flank on a wind-loaded slope. And it's really unique that we had surface hoar surviving on wind-loaded slopes around here. That just, usually it gets destroyed before being preserved so widespread. This was south of Big Sky on Buck Ridge. A couple snowmobilers remote triggered both of these slides. There's the one on the left there, you can see no tracks are in that photo. They triggered it from about as far away as the photo was taken. And that one on the right had a crown that was almost 12 feet deep. Bridger Peak and the Bridger Range, it's a little hard to see, but it went about as wide as it could go. It's not super deep, but Griff up at Bridger said that's as wide as he's seen that propagate. So now we're coming into the end of February, and we've had a little bit of a break from heavy snowfall. We're still seeing a lot of avalanche activity, but it hadn't snowed a ton, and we're kind of dropping things to the low end of considerable, into moderate. And then a snowmobiler triggers this slide on Fisher Mountain in Cook City. It's 3 to 4 feet deep, really hard slab. And it sympathetically triggered this slide on the opposite aspect. That slide we just looked at was right there. And it's kind of impressive that it propagated onto the complete opposite aspect through over a ridge line that is often scoured and free of snow. And so that kept our hackles up just in time for it to start really snowing again. To start March, we had more snow and more rapidly than we had the last 2 months. And a week after that slide was triggered on Fisher Mountain, this natural avalanche broke during, I believe it was during an avalanche warning on the east side of Henderson. This path went really big in the extreme cycle in 2017 or 18, and that was the biggest I've ever seen it go. This was the second biggest. It's not even comparable to that, but it's pretty rare to see it go full width and come over this upper bench here. You see a lot of pretty big slides that don't even come over that bench. We had similar impressive propagating slides in Highlight. That's up above Maid of the Mist. And we were seeing slides in places that we just haven't seen slide before. Like, we know it's avalanche terrain, but it just doesn't really perform. This is a Bacon Rind. Dave took this photo. I believe this was probably natural, or we're not sure of the trigger, but it's 3 to 4 feet deep right off the standard up track, and it's like a 30-degree slope. So we're seeing slides that are going as big as they can go in terrain that we usually see slides, and then pretty big slides in terrain that we rarely see slide. On the 7th of March, a snowmobiler triggered this avalanche on Henderson Mountain, and that one that happened the week before was just over in this bowl here. So they almost connected there. I measured it on GPS over 2,000 feet wide, almost half mile, estimating over 10 feet deep at the deepest there, an average of 6 feet deep. And given a snowpack that is historically the lowest that's been recorded, I can't imagine the slide any bigger. Certainly it's possible with more snow, but it went as wide as it could go, and just almost to the bottom of the snow, or at the bottom of the snowpack, almost to the ground. After we looked at that, that same slope in January had slid, produced some pretty big avalanches. Well, not that big, but on those persistent weak layers, and that 2,000 foot wide slide just propagated through a few of these types of slides that had already happened on that slope. So it did not matter that it had slid before. That same day we were looking at that, we came across this slide on Scotch Bonnet, also broke about as big as it could go, presumably snowmobile triggered. Up on the left there, it broke up onto this shoulder that we often tour up under generally safe conditions, or we assume it's pretty safe most of the time. And it came down well into the flats across some common route of travel. A day later, I came across this slide, and when I was taking the pictures, I didn't know that someone had triggered and been partially buried in it, got themselves out. Another pair of riders watched it happen and sent us a note later, about 2 minutes after I published the forecast the next day. We saw these big avalanches in small terrain. And then after that big cycle, I mean, things just kept getting bigger and bigger through the season. That was, I was saying, the most widespread cycle of large avalanches I've seen. Just the variety of terrain it was happening in. It was happening from West Yellowstone through Cook City up through Big Sky. In March, it started to snow mellowed out a bit. We got some warm temps, and we were seeing less of this deep, persistent activity. During some warm weather, we presume this one was on the north face of Mount Blackmore, was triggered by a cornice fall. It also broke as wide as it could across the face, probably 1,000 feet, and put a bunch of debris piles well into the run-out zone. Also during some warm weather, on the left here, as we were starting to forecast for wet snow on south-facing slopes, on a more northerly aspect, it was still dry. 2 skiers triggered this slide while they were touring up. One was caught and injured and evacuated with helicopter. And that was our most significant accident that we know of in terms of an injury. Just last week, an avalanche broke in the storm snow. A POW surfer triggered that and was caught and partially buried, and I think they were okay. So things with that deep, persistent weak layer have started to mellow out, but as we saw just last week on Flanders, there was that big slide, so we're not forgetting about it yet. But we are starting to see more of our normal spring problems of new snow wind slabs, a wet avalanche there in the middle. It happened a couple weeks ago. But as I showed that picture of Flanders just last week, I think we'll be writing about those deep weak layers for the rest of the season. So to get things wrapped up here, just some notable numbers and trends. We had 21 days with avalanche warnings, which Doug claims is a record. There was a 7-day-long warning from February 4th to 10th for Island Park and West Yellowstone, Southern Madison Range, and a few other areas might have been in and out during that time. From January 8th to March 8th, danger was considerable or high for our southern ranges, so Island Park, West Yellowstone, and Cook City. For 2 months, it didn't drop to moderate or lower. We had our historically low snowpack through February based on SNOTEL data. Most of our sites were lower than the lowest recorded. Some of them have come up above that. And kind of anecdotally, it seemed like we really had little wind until February, just uncharacteristic of Montana. Usually we get a lot of wind that scours things, and I think that played a key role in our weak layers being preserved continuously and creating so many remotely triggered avalanches. Like Dave's down in the flats of Buck Ridge, where oftentimes those are just like scoured down to rocks after every storm. And it's notable that in late December to early January, as we'd only had a little bit of slab built before that, and we had some avalanches, we were continuously getting collapsing of the snowpack, but avalanche activity kind of tapered off. And even into the low danger, we were still getting occasional collapses, but we really weren't seeing avalanches or feeling like we would get an avalanche. So some of our big considerations were, looks like my colors are a little messed up. Considerable should be orange. Were to keep danger elevated even after loading stopped. We had such a weak snowpack that human-triggered avalanches were still likely. And it's a little bit of a wrestle with the danger scale because it says considerable means natural avalanches are possible and human-triggered are likely. And if you're thinking, no, there's no loading, there's no way we're going to have naturals, you might want to drop to moderate. But when it feels like you could trigger any steep slope, considerable seems more appropriate. And we're really worried about human-triggered avalanches here. So we kind of took that approach, and I think it worked out well. Another thing we've learned over this year and last year and almost every year here, we see avalanches break on persistent weak layers during a small storm or an average-sized storm that's kind of in the middle of a long loading period or towards the end of a long loading period, a period of cumulative loading. And it's easy to kind of get complacent during those periods. You get a few storms and you don't see any avalanches break on those weak layers and you're like, oh, snowpack's doing great, let's drop the danger. And that's usually when you get the avalanche on the persistent weak layer. So I think when it's loading, even if you're not seeing activity, it's really good to stay conservative. And then if you've had a lot of activity or if human-triggered avalanches continue after loading stops, consider maintaining danger for multiple days after that. I'll wrap it up with that. Maybe there's any questions or if there's any comments from the other forecasters. I'd like to just say thanks to Doug and Dave, Ian, and our intern Zach for documenting all this, and especially Zach for entering pretty much all of these OBS and photos into our website this year.
We've got time for just a few questions. Sam, I think you're up next, so if you could start hooking up, we'll take some questions for Alex, that'd be great.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you can speak to it all, or maybe Doug can speak to this better. Over the years, has your forecasting season gotten shorter? And if so, do you think that's affected any of this data that you presented on in any way?
No, I mean, if anything, I wouldn't say, it's almost gotten a little longer just because we have more users out there on the shoulder season. So I feel like we actually have more data from early and late than a decade ago. Eric.
What's your take on large wet slab avalanches still occurring?
I would say,
a lot of it's weather dependent.
yeah, yeah. There's always the caveat of it depends. But with a season like that, I'd put my money on we'll see some big wet slabs. I think whether we see like a widespread cycle or not is going to be more weather dependent. But I think we've got to at least see a few. We had a good warm up in late January that didn't do a ton, but we have had a few warm ups, so we're starting to kind of chip away at that wet snow getting into the snowpack, and maybe that slower or more gradual melt or back and forth between hot and cold will maybe prevent a big cycle. But it won't take much if we get a couple nights without freezing or rain, or maybe we'll go out this afternoon and see some big wet slabs. Who knows? Anything else? I'll be around all day to chat. Thanks.